Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room cast harsh shadows across Dorian Hayes' face as he stared down at the newborn in the clear plastic bassinet. His hands gripped the metal railing, knuckles white with tension as he studied the sleeping infant. The joy he'd felt just hours ago when the nurse announced, "It's a boy," had curdled into something darker, more insidious. Something wasn't right. The thought had been gnawing at him since the moment they'd placed the crying infant on Marisol's chest. He'd pushed it aside then, telling himself he was being paranoid, that the strange feeling in his gut was just new father anxiety. But now, alone with the child while his wife slept, that gnawing sensation had grown into an overwhelming roar of doubt that he couldn't silence. The baby's skin tone was several shades darker than either his or Marisol's fair complexion. Both of them came from European ancestry, his family primarily English and German, hers Spanish. The infant's features, though still new and undefined, bore little resemblance to their own. Dorian leaned closer, studying the curve of the nose, the shape of the lips, searching desperately for some feature that might quiet his growing suspicion. "Mr. Hayes?" A nurse's quiet voice interrupted his intense scrutiny. She was young, probably new to the maternity ward, with a gentle smile that did nothing to ease the knot in his stomach. "I noticed you've been standing here for quite a while. Would you like to hold him?" Dorian straightened, forcing his fingers to release their death grip on the bassinet. "No, I'm fine just watching." The thought of holding the child, of establishing that physical connection, made his chest tight with anxiety. The nurse's smile faltered slightly. "Well, I have some paperwork that needs your attention when you have a moment." She held up a clipboard, the papers on it seeming to glow ominously under the harsh hospital lighting. "What kind of paperwork?" "Just the birth certificate," she said, maintaining her professional cheerfulness. "We need the father's signature to make it official." Standard procedure. Father's signature. The words hit him like a physical blow. Dorian accepted the clipboard with numb fingers, staring down at the blank line where he was supposed to sign, where he was supposed to legally claim this child as his own. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as he held it over the paper. "Is everything all right, Mr. Hayes?" The nurse's smile had faded completely now, replaced by a look of genuine concern. "You seem troubled." Dorian's throat felt dry, his voice coming out rough. "I need some time to look this over. Is that okay?" "Of course." She hesitated, glancing between him and the sleeping infant. "Take all the time you need. Just bring it to the nurse's station when you're ready." She lingered for a moment longer before leaving. Casting a worried glance over her shoulder, Dorian sank into the vinyl hospital chair, the clipboard heavy in his hands. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. His eyes moved between the official document and the sleeping infant, his mind racing through memories of the past year. How many late nights had Marisol worked? How many emergency meetings had kept her at the office? How many times had she pulled away from his touch, claiming exhaustion? The soft click of the door opening made him look up. His mother, Eleanor Hayes, swept into the room with all the authority of someone who believed they always knew best. Her silver-streaked hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, her designer outfit pristine. She carried a large gift bag with "Welcome Baby" emblazoned across it in cheerful letters that seemed to mock Dorian's turmoil. "There's my beautiful grandson," she cooed, moving straight to the bassinet without acknowledging Dorian's presence. She set the bag down and peered at the sleeping infant with an expression of adoration that seemed forced, theatrical. "He's absolutely perfect." Dorian watched her closely, searching for any sign that she shared his concerns. But Eleanor's face remained carefully composed, her movements deliberate as she adjusted the baby's blanket with manicured fingers. "And how are you holding up, darling?" she finally addressed him, though her eyes remained on the baby. "I know these first few hours of fatherhood can be overwhelming. Your father was a complete mess when you were born, could hardly string two words together." The casual mention of fatherhood made Dorian's jaw clench. "Mom, I need your honest opinion about something." Eleanor turned to him then, her expression already shifting to one of mild annoyance. She'd never appreciated being questioned about anything. "What is it?" "Look at him," Dorian said, gesturing to the bassinet. Really look at him. Does he look like he could be my son? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Eleanor's face hardened, her perfectly painted lips pressing into a thin line. What exactly are you implying, Dorian? You know exactly what I'm implying. He stood, moving to the bassinet. Look at his skin tone, his features. Neither Marisol nor I have any ancestry that would explain. Stop right there. Eleanor's voice was sharp enough to make the baby stir. Her hand shot out, gripping Dorian's arm with surprising strength. I will not listen to these ridiculous accusations. Your wife has just gone through 18 hours of labor to bring your child into this world. And this is how you respond? With suspicion and paranoia? It's not paranoia if what? She released his arm, but stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. If you're looking for excuses to doubt your wife, to abandon your responsibilities, to destroy this family with unfounded accusations. Her eyes fell to the clipboard in his hands, understanding dawning on her face. Is that the birth certificate? She reached for it. Give it to me. I'll make sure it gets filed properly. Dorian pulled the clipboard away from her reaching hand. I'm not signing anything until I'm sure. Sure of what? Eleanor's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, real anger seeping through. That you're going to destroy your marriage over some unfounded suspicions? Do you have any idea what people will say if you refuse to sign your own child's birth certificate? What this will do to your reputation? To this family's reputation? I don't care about reputation right now, Mom. I care about the truth. The truth. Eleanor's laugh was bitter, cutting. The truth is that you're acting like a fool. Your wife needs your support right now, not your suspicion. Sign the certificate, Dorian. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Movement from the hospital bed caught their attention. Marisol was stirring, her eyes fluttering open. Eleanor immediately moved to her side. All sweetness and concern again, the anger of moments before hidden behind a mask of maternal care. There's my beautiful daughter-in-law, she said, helping Marisol sit up, plumping pillows behind her with practiced efficiency. How are you feeling, dear? You should be resting. Marisol's eyes found Dorian first, then dropped to the clipboard in his hands. Something flickered across her face, fear? Guilt? Before she composed herself. Is that the birth certificate? Yes, Eleanor answered before Dorian could speak. But your husband seems to be having some concerns. The way she said concerns made it sound like a dirty word. Marisol's hands twisted in the hospital blanket, her knuckles white against the sterile, white fabric. Concerns? What kind of concerns? Dorian moved to the foot of the bed, still clutching the clipboard like a shield. I think you know exactly what kind of concerns, Marisol. Dorian, please, she said, her voice trembling. Her eyes darted to Eleanor, then back to him. Don't do this. Not now. Don't do what? Ask why our child doesn't look anything like me. Ask why you've been acting strange every time I bring it up. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but he couldn't stop now. The doubt and suspicion that had been building needed release. You're being ridiculous, Eleanor cut in, positioning herself between them like a barrier. The baby looks perfectly normal for a newborn. They all look different when they're first born. Your sister looked nothing like your father when she was born, but now she's a spitting image. This isn't about normal newborn appearance, Dorian snapped, his patience finally breaking. This is about the fact that this child clearly has features that neither Marisol nor I could have passed on. Features that suggest, don't. Eleanor's voice was like a whip crack. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Tears welled up in Marisol's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. Please, Dorian, just sign the certificate. We can talk about this later, when we're home, when we're alone. The emphasis on alone wasn't lost on him. She wanted to tell him something she couldn't say in front of Eleanor. But was it the truth, or just another manipulation? No. The word came out firm and final. I'm not signing anything until I know for sure. I want a paternity test. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, anger, disgust before settling into cold fury. A paternity test? Her voice dripped with contempt. Do you hear yourself? This is your wife, the mother of your child. Is he? Dorian interrupted, his voice rising to match her intensity. Is he my child, Marisol? Because right now, I'm having serious doubts about that. The baby began to cry, as if sensing the tension in the room. A nurse appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Is everything okay in here? Everything's fine, Eleanor said smoothly, though her eyes blazed with anger. Just some new parent jitters. We'll keep it down. The nurse looked uncertain, her gaze moving between the three adults and the crying infant. Perhaps we should give Mrs. Hayes some time to rest. Yes, perhaps we should, Eleanor agreed, giving Dorian a pointed look. My son was just leaving to get some air. Weren't you Dorian's? But Dorian stood his ground. I'm not going anywhere until this is resolved. There's nothing to resolve, Eleanor hissed. Sign the certificate, Dorian. Don't make a scene that you'll regret later. He looked between them, his mother's stern face, Marisol's tear-stained cheeks, and felt something harden inside him. The pressure they were trying to exert, the manipulation they were attempting, it all only served to confirm his suspicions. No. He placed the clipboard on the bedside table with deliberate care. I'm not signing anything without a DNA test. And if you try to pressure me into it, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why I refused. He walked out of the room, ignoring his mother's calls and his wife's crying. In the hallway, he pulled out his phone and began searching for paternity testing services. His hands shook slightly as he scrolled through the results, but his resolve was firm. The truth would come out, one way or another, and no amount of manipulation from either of them would change that. The next 3 days passed in a blur of tension and barely contained accusations. Eleanor had practically moved into their house, running interference between Dorian and Marisol, trying to pressure him into signing the birth certificate before it becomes a legal issue. She'd taken over the guest room closest to the nursery. Positioning herself as both gatekeeper and guardian, Dorian retreated to his home office, converting it into a fortress where he could think clearly, away from their combined attempts at manipulation. He spent hours researching paternity laws, documenting every interaction, every suspicious behavior he could remember from the past year. The picture that emerged wasn't pretty, that he remembered the work conference in Miami 6 months ago, when Marisol's phone had gone straight to voicemail every time he called. The sudden changes in her work schedule that always seemed to coincide with certain days of the week. The way she'd changed her phone's password and started keeping it face down on tables. All the little signs he'd dismissed, explained away, or ignored out of trust and love. The sound of Eleanor's voice drifted up from the kitchen below, accompanied by the clink of dishes and the soft murmur of Marisol's responses. They were playing house, pretending everything was normal while they waited for him to come to his senses. The thought made his jaw clench that a knock at his office door interrupted his brooding. Dorian? Eleanor's voice, honey-sweet with underlying steel. Dinner's ready, darling. Come join us. I'm not hungry. He didn't look up from his computer screen. You need to eat. The doorknob rattled locked, as it had been since they'd brought the baby home. You can't stay in there forever. Watch me. A heavy sigh from the other side of the door. This behavior isn't helping anyone. You're only making things worse. Worse than trying to trick me into claiming another man's child as my own. The words came out sharp, cutting. Lower your voice, Eleanor hissed. The neighbors will hear. Maybe they should. Dorian pushed back from his desk, moving to stand near the door. Maybe everyone should hear about what's really going on in this house. You wouldn't dare. But there was a note of uncertainty in her voice now. Try me? He returned to his desk, ignoring her continued attempts to engage him. Eventually, her footsteps retreated down the hallway. Dorian checked his email again. Still no results from the lab. They promised 3 to 5 business days, and each hour that passed felt like an eternity. But he would wait. The truth was worth waiting for. The next morning, he woke early and left the house before Eleanor could corner him. He drove to his office, not ready to face another day of their psychological warfare. His secretary, Linda, looked surprised to see him. I thought you were still on paternity leave, she said, following him into his office with a stack of messages. Change of plans. He settled behind his desk, grateful for the normalcy of work routine. Hold my calls unless it's the lab. The lab. Linda's expression shifted to concern. Is everything okay with the baby? Dorian looked up at her, studying her face. Linda had worked for him for 5 years, had attended his wedding to Marisol, had helped plan the baby shower. She was also the office gossip, which might prove useful. Actually, Linda, I could use your help with something. He gestured for her to close the door. What do you know about Marisol's work schedule over the past year? The time she came to meet me for lunch or called to cancel plans? Linda's eyes widened slightly, but she sat down and pulled out her tablet. I keep pretty detailed records of your schedule. Let me check. An hour later, Dorian had a comprehensive timeline of Marisol's pattern of cancellations and rescheduled meetings. There was a clear pattern every Wednesday afternoon. Like clockwork, she'd had some reason why she couldn't meet him for their standing lunch date. The same day her department allegedly had their weekly team meetings. There's something else, Linda said hesitantly. I wasn't sure if I should mention it. Tell me. About 4 months ago, I saw her at that new Italian place on 5th Street. It was a Wednesday around 1 o'clock. She was with a man, not you obviously. They seemed close. Dorian's hands clenched into fists under his desk. Did you recognize him? No, but... Linda bit her lip. He was wearing a company badge. Different division, I think, but definitely one of ours. The piece clicked into place. The father worked in the same company. That's how they'd met. How they'd managed to keep their affair hidden behind the veneer of professional meetings and team projects. Do you remember anything else about him? Dorian kept his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair. He was tall, athletic-looking, dark skin, maybe mixed race. I remember thinking he looked like he worked out a lot. She paused, then added, I saw them together a few other times too, always on Wednesdays, always looking intimate. Dorian nodded slowly, adding these details to his growing file of evidence. Thank you, Linda. I'd appreciate it if you kept this conversation between us for now. Of course. She stood, hesitating at the door. Dorian, I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. After she left, Dorian pulled up the company directory on his computer. There were thousands of employees, but he could narrow it down. Athletic build, mixed race, someone who would have regular contact with Marisol's department. He began methodically searching through department photos and profiles. His phone buzzed another message from Eleanor. The pediatrician needs your signature on insurance forms. Stop being childish and come home. He ignored it, focusing on his search. 3 hours and hundreds of profiles later, he found him. Kenneth Kenny James, Senior Project Manager in Business Development. The photo showed exactly what Linda had described: tall, athletic, mixed race. His profile listed him as a liaison to several departments, including Marisol's. That Dorian's cursor hovered over the profile link. One click would show him more about the man who had potentially destroyed his marriage. Instead, he took a screenshot and added it to his evidence file. He needed to be methodical about this, needed to build an ironclad case before making any moves. His phone buzzed again. Eleanor, this time. Your behavior is becoming concerning. If you don't come home tonight, we'll have to take appropriate action. The threat was clear, though carefully worded. They were probably planning to claim he'd abandoned his family, trying to force his hand. Well, let them try. He had evidence of their manipulation, their lies, their attempts to force him into claiming paternity of another man's child, that he worked late into the night, building his case piece by piece. Around midnight, he finally drove home, parking his car silently in the driveway. The house was dark except for a light in the nursery. Through the window, he could see Eleanor rocking the baby, her lips moving in what was probably a lullaby. The scene might have been touching if he didn't know the truth behind it. Another manipulation, another attempt to force him into accepting a lie inside. The house was quiet except for the soft creak of the rocking chair upstairs. Dorian made his way to the kitchen, needing coffee to help him think clearly. He found Marisol sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone in the dim light from the microwave display. She looked up when he entered, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. You're home? Don't sound so surprised. It is my house. He moved past her to the coffee maker, keeping his back turned as he measured out grounds. Dorian, please, can we talk? Without my mother-in-law hovering? The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence between them. Talk about what, Marisol? About how you and my mother are trying to force me to claim another man's child as my own? About how you've been lying to me for? How long exactly? It's not that simple. Her voice cracked. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. He turned to face her, leaning against the counter. Explain how you could betray me like this. Explain how you could try to trap me into raising another man's child. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I never meant for any of this to happen. He was just what? Convenient? Available on Wednesday afternoons when you were supposed to be in team meetings? Marisol's face went pale. How did you know about your Wednesday meetings? Dorian's laugh was bitter. I know a lot of things, Marisol. I've been putting the pieces together. And you know what? The more I discover, the worse it gets. Whatever you think you know, I know enough. He cut her off. I know about Kenny James. The coffee maker beeped, but neither of them moved. Marisol's hands trembled as she gripped her phone tighter. You've been investigating me? Did you really think I wouldn't? That I'd just accept this situation blindly? He poured his coffee with steady hands, the normalcy of the action at odds with the tension in the room. The paternity test results should be back any day now. Want to tell me what they're going to say? Dorian, no, you know what? Don't. He picked up his coffee cup. Save your explanations for the lawyers. Because this isn't going away. This isn't something you and my mother can smooth over with manipulation and lies. He headed for the stairs, then paused in the doorway. Oh, and Marisol? Tell Kenny he might want a lawyer up too. Because when this all comes out, and it will come out his wife might have some questions of her own. The sound of Marisol's quiet sobs followed him up the stairs, but he felt no urge to comfort her. Let her cry. Let her feel a fraction of the pain and betrayal she'd inflicted on him. This was just the beginning of the consequences she'd face for her actions that I in his office. He added notes about their conversation to his growing file of evidence. The coffee grew cold beside him as he worked, documenting every detail while it was fresh in his mind. Hours passed, marked only by the gradual lightening of the sky outside his window and the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway. Eleanor or Marisol, checking to see if he'd emerged, he didn't sleep. How could he, knowing that just down the hall, they were continuing their charade? Instead, he focused on his plan, on the evidence he was gathering, on the justice he would eventually serve. They had made their choices, set this chain of events in motion. Now they would face the consequences, one by one. Until the scales of justice were balanced again, morning arrived with the buzz of his phone, an email notification that made his heart race. The lab results were in the email from the testing facility, sat unopened in Dorian's inbox for several long minutes as he gathered his composure. Through his office window, he could see Marisol and Eleanor in the backyard, taking advantage of the morning sunshine. Eleanor held the baby, cooing and rocking while Marisol arranged breakfast on the patio table, a perfect domestic scene that made his stomach turn. His cursor hovered over the email. Part of him wanted to savor this moment, this last second before suspicion became certainty. But he couldn't wait any longer. With a steady hand, he clicked. The clinical language of the report filled his screen, but his eyes went straight to the conclusion. The alleged father, Dorian Hayes, is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. This conclusion is based on the fact that the alleged father lacks the genetic markers that must be contributed to the child by the biological father. The probability of paternity is 0%. The words seemed to pulse on the screen, growing larger with each beat of his heart. Scientific certainty that his wife had betrayed him, that his mother had tried to force him to claim another man's child as his own. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface began to boil over. Dorian printed 3 copies of the results, each one sliding out of the printer like a verdict. He tucked them in his separate folders, one for his lawyer, one for his records, and one for the confrontation that was about to unfold. With methodical precision, he gathered the other evidence he'd collected. The timeline of Marisol's suspicious behavior, Linda's written statement about the Wednesday meetings, the screenshot of Kenny James's profile. He found them in the kitchen, preparing lunch as if everything was normal, as if they hadn't spent days trying to manipulate him into accepting a lie that would have altered the course of his entire life. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady despite the fury coursing through him. Eleanor started to speak, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Not you, Mom. This is between me and my wife. Anything you have to say to Marisol, you can say in front of me," Eleanor insisted, moving to stand beside her daughter-in-law in a show of solidarity that made Dorian's blood boil. Fine. He slapped the folder down on the kitchen counter, the sound making both women jump. Have it your way. You can both see the proof of what I've been saying all along. Marisol's face went pale as she stared at the folder, making no move to open it. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter, so hard her knuckles turned white. Eleanor reached for the folder instead, her movements deliberately calm as she pulled out the papers. Her expression remained unchanged as she read, but Dorian could see the slight tightening around her eyes, the only tell that she understood the gravity of what she was seeing. These results could be wrong, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. These tests aren't always accurate. They're not wrong, Dorian interrupted, his eyes fixed on Marisol. Are they? Marisol's shoulders began to shake, tears spilling down her cheeks. Dorian, I don't. His voice cut through her attempt at explanation like a knife. Don't try to lie your way out of this. The truth is right there in black and white. What I want to know is how long you two thought you could keep this charade going. How long were you planning to let me raise another man's child? Thinking it was mine. We were trying to protect you, Eleanor interjected, still trying to maintain control of the situation. To protect this family. Protect me? Dorian's laugh was harsh, echoing off the kitchen tiles. By trying to force me to claim paternity of a child that isn't mine? By attempting to manipulate me into signing legal documents that would have tied me to this lie forever? That's not protection, Mother. That's fraud. It doesn't have to be this way, Marisol said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands twisted together, a nervous habit he'd once found endearing. We can still be a family. You could still be his father. No. The word came out like a gunshot, making both women flinch. I will not be manipulated into raising another man's child, just to save your reputation or satisfy my mother's obsession with appearances. This ends now. Don't be hasty, Dorian, Eleanor warned, her voice taking on the stern tone she'd used throughout his childhood when he defied her wishes. Think about what this will do to all of us if it becomes public. Think about your position in the community. I've thought about it. I've thought about nothing else for days. Dorian gathered up the test results, tucking them back into the folder. And I've decided that I don't care about any of that. What I care about is justice. And believe me, I will have it. He turned to leave the kitchen, but paused in the doorway. I suggest you both start thinking about what you're going to say when people start asking questions. Because they will be asking questions. Lots of them. What are you going to do? Marisol's voice trembled with fear. Dorian looked back at them, his mother's rigid posture, his wife's tear-stained face, and felt nothing but cold determination. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Every last detail. You wouldn't, Eleanor said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Think about what this will do to the family name. The family name? Dorian's laugh was bitter. You mean the name you're so desperate to protect that you'd force your own son to raise another man's child? That family name? Please, Marisol begged, taking a step toward him. We can work this out. We can what? Pretend this never happened? Go on living a lie. He shook his head. No. You made your choices, Marisol. You and my mother, and Kenny James, yes, I know about him too. Now you'll all face the consequences. The baby's cry pierced the tension, making Marisol jump. She started toward the stairs, but Dorian's voice stopped her. By the way, he said, his tone conversational but laced with steel, I've already contacted my lawyer. Expect to hear from them soon. Very soon. He climbed the stairs to his office, the sound of Marisol's sobs and Eleanor's attempts at comfort floating up from the kitchen. But instead of feeling guilty or conflicted, he felt only a growing sense of purpose. They had tried to trap him in a lie, to force him into accepting a betrayal that would have poisoned his entire life. Now they would face the consequences of their actions, one by one. Until justice was served at Iana's office, Dorian began composing emails, one to his lawyer, outlining everything he'd discovered, and another to Kenny James's department head, requesting a meeting to discuss some concerning professional conduct. Let them try to maintain their facades now. Let them scramble to contain the damage. He would make sure the truth came out, no matter the cost. The paternity test results lay on his desk, a constant reminder of why he couldn't back down, couldn't give in to the pressure to maintain peace at the cost of truth. They had made their choices, set this chain of events in motion. Now they would all face the consequences, one by one. Until the scales of justice were balanced again, the morning after the confrontation, Dorian sat in his office reviewing the security footage from the company parking garage. His IT contact had come through, providing weeks of recordings showing the familiar pattern. Every Wednesday afternoon, Kenny James's black BMW would park next to Marisol's red sedan. Sometimes they'd leave together in his car. Sometimes they'd return hours later. Disheveled and laughing, his phone buzzed another message from Eleanor. He read it with a grimace. "This behavior has to stop," she'd written. "Come home and we'll discuss this like adults." He typed back, "Nothing to discuss. DNA doesn't lie." The response came immediately. "You're being unreasonable. Think about your reputation." "My reputation?" He laughed bitterly, speaking the words aloud to his empty office. "How about we think about yours?" His desk phone lit up Linda on the intercom. "Mr. Hayes? There's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." "Who is it?" A pause. "Mr. James from Business Development." Dorian's hands clenched into fists. "Send him in?" Kenny James strode into the office like he owned it, all confident swagger and expensive suit. He was exactly as Linda had described. Tall, athletic, mixed race, precisely the kind of man who'd catch Marisol's wandering eye. The sight of him made Dorian's blood boil. "We need to talk," Kenny said, closing the door behind him. Dorian leaned back in his chair, keeping his voice deliberately casual. "About what? The weather? The quarterly reports? Or maybe about how you've been fucking my wife?" Kenny's confident facade cracked slightly. "Look, this doesn't have to get ugly. Too late?" Dorian stood, his movement deliberate and controlled. "It got ugly the moment you and Marisol tried to pass off your child as mine. That's not—" Kenny started, then stopped, running a hand over his face. "Marisol said you knew. About the baby. But we can work something out here, man to man." "Man to man?" Dorian's laugh was sharp enough to make Kenny flinch. "Real men don't sleep with married women. Real men don't try to trick other men into raising their bastards." Kenny's face darkened. "Watch your mouth." "Or what?" Dorian came around the desk, closing the distance between them. "You'll do something about it? Please try. Give me one more reason to destroy you." "Is that a threat?" "No, it's a promise." Dorian's voice was ice cold. "I'm going to take everything from you, Kenny. Your job, your reputation, your marriage. Yes, I know about Tessa. Does she know about your Wednesday afternoon meetings with my wife?" The color drained from Kenny's face. "Leave Tessa out of this. Like you left me out of your little arrangement with Marisol?" Dorian shook his head. "No, I don't think so. Your wife deserves to know what kind of man she married. You son of a—" Kenny lunged forward, but Dorian was ready, that he sidestepped the clumsy attack, letting Kenny's momentum carry him into the desk. Papers scattered, the computer monitor wobbled, and Kenny caught himself against the edge, breathing hard. "Careful now," Dorian said, straightening his tie. "Assaulting a colleague in his office? That would look really bad in your personnel file. Almost as bad as using company time and resources to conduct an affair. What do you want?" Kenny's voice was strained. "Money? Is that it? Money?" Dorian laughed again, the sound entirely without humor. "I want justice. I want everyone to know exactly what you and Marisol did. I want your wife to know. I want your boss to know. I want everyone in this company to know what kind of people you really are." "You'll regret this," Kenny warned, but his voice wavered. "Marisol said you'd be reasonable. Marisol doesn't know me as well as she thinks." Dorian moved to open his office door. "Now get out. And Kenny, tell your wife I'm sorry about what's coming. She's an innocent party in all this, but she deserves to know the truth." Kenny straightened, adjusting his rumpled suit. "This isn't over." "You're right about that." Dorian's smile was cold. "It's just beginning." After Kenny left, Dorian called security and requested the footage from the past 10 minutes. One more piece of evidence showing Kenny's true colors. One more nail in the coffin of their carefully constructed lies. His phone buzzed again. "Marisol this time. Kenny told me you threatened him. Please stop this. We can work something out." He typed back, "Like you work something out every Wednesday afternoon? Don't contact me again, except through my lawyer." The response came quickly. "You're going to destroy everything." "No," he wrote. You did that when you tried to pass off another man's child as mine. He blocked her number after that, then did the same with Eleanor's. Let them stew in their own mess for a while. He had work to do. Opening his laptop, he began composing an email to Thomas Richards, the company's head of human resources. The subject line was simple: Professional Misconduct Report, Kenneth James and Marisol Hayes. Mr. Richards, I am writing to formally report a serious breach of professional conduct involving Kenneth James from Business Development and Marisol Hayes from Marketing. I have evidence of their inappropriate relationship, including security footage showing them misusing company time and resources for personal activities, that I am requesting a formal investigation into this matter. I have extensive documentation to support these allegations, including, he attached selected clips from the security footage, careful to choose ones that showed them entering and leaving together during work hours. Let HR draw their own conclusions about what happened in between. Next, he opened a new document and began typing out a detailed timeline of every suspicious incident he could remember from the past year. Every late meeting, every canceled lunch date, every strange phone call, it all went into the record. When he was done, he had pages of documented evidence showing the systematic nature of their deception. His office phone rang. Eleanor again, this time using her cell phone since he'd blocked her home number. What? He answered, his voice clipped. Your father would be ashamed of you, she said without preamble. Airing family business like this, causing a scandal. Dad would be ashamed of me? Dorian cut her off. Not of you, for trying to force your son to raise another man's child. Not of Marisol, for betraying her marriage vows. You're being dramatic. These things happen in marriages. Mature adults find ways to work through them. Mature adults don't commit fraud, he shot back. They don't try to trick their children into claiming paternity of someone else's baby. I was trying to protect you. No, you were trying to protect your precious reputation. Well, guess what, Mother? Your reputation is about to take a major hit. How do you think your society friends will react when they find out you try to cover up your daughter-in-law's affair? You wouldn't dare. Watch me. He hung up, then blocked her cell number 2. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. He met with his lawyer, sharing the growing file of evidence he'd collected. He spoke with HR, detailing Kenny and Marisol's misuse of company time and resources. He arranged for a private investigator to document any further meetings between them, though he doubted they'd be stupid enough to continue seeing each other. Now around 6, Lyndon knocked on his door. Mr. Hayes? There's a woman here to see you. Says her name is Tessa James. Dorian looked up from his computer. This was unexpected. He hadn't planned to contact Kenny's wife until he had all his evidence in order. Send her in. Tessa James was everything Marisol wasn't: tall, confident, with none of his wife's artificial sweetness. She walked into his office like a woman on a mission, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. Mr. Hayes, she said, extending her hand. I think we need to talk. Dorian gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit down. And call me Dorian. All right, Dorian. She sat, crossing her legs at the ankle. My husband came home very agitated today. Started shredding papers, deleting emails. Want to tell me why? I think you already know why, Mrs. James. Tessa, she corrected. And yes, I have my suspicions. But I'd like to hear it from you. Dorian studied her for a moment, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a file. These are copies of security footage showing your husband and my wife meeting during work hours. There are also bank statements showing hotel charges, restaurant receipts, and, he paused, DNA test results proving that the child my wife recently gave birth to is not mine. Tessa took the file with steady hands, her expression carefully neutral as she reviewed the contents. When she looked up, her eyes were hard as flint. How long have you known? About the affair? I had suspicions for a while. About the baby? Since the birth, though I just got the DNA confirmation yesterday. She nodded slowly. And you're sure? About the baby being Kenny's? The DNA test is conclusive, and given the timing of their meetings, it fits. I see. Tessa closed the file carefully. Thank you for showing me this. I appreciate your honesty. You don't seem surprised. I'm not entirely. Her smile was bitter. Kenny's done this before, though never quite this dramatically. Usually, he's more careful. You knew about other affairs. Suspected them. Could never prove anything. She tapped the file with one perfectly manicured nail. Until now. What are you going to do? File for divorce, obviously. She stood, smoothing her skirt. And I'd like to help you. Dorian raised an eyebrow. Help me? Yes. Her smile turned predatory. You're planning to expose them, aren't you? Make them face consequences for their actions? That's the plan. Then let me help. I have access to Kenny's personal accounts, his emails, his phone records. Things that might be useful to your cause. Dorian leaned forward, interested. Why would you want to help me? Because Kenny James has hurt enough people. Her voice hardened. And because I want him to learn that actions have consequences. Real ones, not just the slap on the wrist he usually gets. What did you have in mind? Give me 24 hours, she said, moving toward the door. I'll get you everything you need to bury him professionally and personally. And Marisol? Tessa paused, her hand on the doorknob. Her too. Women like her, who knowingly sleep with married men. They deserve whatever's coming to them. After she left, Dorian sat back in his chair, thinking. This was an unexpected alliance, but a potentially useful one. Between his evidence and whatever Tessa could provide, they could ensure that Kenny and Marisol's betrayal would have lasting consequences. His computer chimed a new email from HR confirming receipt of his complaint and announcing an immediate investigation into Kenny and Marisol's conduct. The wheels were in motion now, the dominoes beginning to fall. Let them try to deny it, he thought. Let them try to explain away the evidence, to minimize their actions, to paint him as the unreasonable one. He would make sure everyone knew the truth, no matter what it cost them. No matter what it cost him, they had chosen their path, made their decisions, committed their betrayals. Now they would face the consequences, one by one. Until justice was served the next morning, Dorian arrived at his office to find a courier envelope waiting on his desk. Inside was a letter from Marisol's lawyer, along with what appeared to be a signed acknowledgement of paternity form with his signature on it. This is impossible, he muttered, studying the signature. It was good, very good, but not perfect. He'd spent years signing legal documents, and he knew every quirk of his own signature. His phone rang his lawyer, David Mitchell. Tell me you've seen this morning's delivery, David said without preamble. Looking at it right now. Dorian held the document up to the light. It's forged, obviously, but it's a good forgery. Good enough to cause problems if we don't handle this carefully. They're desperate, Dorian said, setting the paper down. Mother must have realized I'm serious about exposing everything. This goes beyond desperate, David replied. This is criminal. Forging legal documents? That's not just unethical. It's illegal. A knock at his door interrupted them. Linda poked her head in, her expression worried. Mr. Hayes? Eleanor Hayes is here. She's insisting on seeing you. I'll call you back, Dorian told David. To Linda, he said, send her in. Eleanor swept into the office like an avenging angel, designer handbag clutched like a weapon. Have you completely lost your mind? Good morning to you too, Mother. Dorian held up the forged document. Want to explain this? That. Eleanor waved dismissively. That's just proof that you already acknowledge paternity. The hospital must have misplaced the original copy. Stop lying. Dorian's voice cut through her explanation. We both know this is a forgery. A good one, but still fake. Want to tell me whose idea it was? Yours or Marisol's? Eleanor's perfectly made-up face showed a flicker of uncertainty. I don't know what you're talking about. No. Dorian reached into his desk and pulled out a file. Because I have examples of my actual signature on dozens of legal documents. Would you like to see how they compare to this forgery? Or should we skip straight to the part where I file criminal charges? Criminal charges? Eleanor's laugh was brittle. Against your own mother? Don't be absurd. Why not? You were willing to commit fraud against your own son. He leaned forward, eyes hard. Tell me something, Mother. When did you know? About the affair, about the baby. When did you figure out Marisol was trying to pass off another man's child as mine? I was trying to protect you. Answer the question. Eleanor sank into a chair, her composure cracking slightly. I suspected something was wrong when she first told me she was pregnant. The timing seemed off, but she swore it was yours, and I thought if we could just get through this, keep it quiet. Dorian's laugh was harsh. By forcing me to raise another man's child? By forging documents when I refused to play along? You don't understand what a scandal like this could do to your reputation, to your standing in the community. He stood, looming over her. That's all you care about, isn't it? Not the fact that your daughter-in-law betrayed me. Not the fact that she tried to trick me into raising her lover's child. Just how it might affect your social status. You're being dramatic. No, Mother. I'm being honest. Something you might want to try. He picked up the forged document. Who did this? I want a name. I don't. A name, Mother. Now. Or I start making phone calls to the police, to the hospital, to every lawyer in town who might be interested in a fraud case. Eleanor's shoulders slumped. Marcus Reeves? He's an associate who sometimes helps with sensitive matters. A forger, you mean? Dorian made a note of the name. And this was your idea? Or Marisol's? We were both. She paused, choosing her words carefully, concerned about your reaction to the situation. My reaction? Dorian's voice rose. You mean my perfectly reasonable reaction to discovering my wife's infidelity and attempted fraud? If you would just listen. No, you listen. He came around the desk, standing over her. This ends now. The forged documents, the manipulation, all of it. Because if you try anything like this again, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what you did. Every friend, every social contact, every charity board you sit on, they'll all know how Eleanor Hayes tried to help cover up her daughter-in-law's affair by forging legal documents. You wouldn't dare. Try me? He moved to the door, opening it. Now get out. And tell Marisol that if she tries to use these forged documents, I'll have both of you arrested for fraud. After Eleanor left, Dorian called David back. How quickly can you get a restraining order? Against whom? All of them. Marisol, Mother, Kenny James. I want legal documentation of every attempt they make to contact or threaten me. I'll file the paperwork today. David paused. You should know Marisol's lawyer reached out. They're threatening to claim you abandoned her and the baby. Let them try. Dorian smiled coldly. I have DNA proof the child isn't mine, evidence of their affair, and now proof they tried to forge legal documents. See how well their abandonment claim holds up against that. They're getting desperate, David warned. Desperate people do stupid things. Good. Dorian looked at the growing file of evidence on his desk. Let them get desperate. Let them make mistakes. Every stupid thing they do just gives us more ammunition. His computer chimed an email from Tessa James. The subject line read, "Everything you need." Inside was a treasure trove of information. Kenny's personal emails to Marisol, dating back months. Hotel receipts. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts. Bank statements showing suspicious purchases. Jewelry, weekend getaways, all during the time he was supposedly at work meetings. This is perfect, he muttered, forwarding everything to David. Another chime, HR this time, requesting a meeting about his complaint. The dominoes were falling faster now. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Marisol, using a friend's phone to get around his block. Please stop this. You're going to destroy everything we built. He saved the message as evidence, then replied, You destroyed it the moment you decided to pass off another man's child as mine. Don't contact me again. Another buzz, we can fix this. Eleanor knows people who can help make this go away, quietly. Like Marcus Reeves, he typed back. The forger who helped you create fake documents? How's that working out for you? There was a long pause before her next message. How did you know about Marcus? I know everything, he replied. And soon everyone else will too. Hope it was worth it. He blocked the new number and turned back to his computer, continuing to document every interaction, every threat, every attempt at manipulation. Let them try to deny it now. Let them try to paint him as the unreasonable one. He had truth and evidence on his side, and he would use both to ensure they paid for their betrayal. Then a knock at his door announced Linda. Mr. Hayes? HR is ready for your meeting. Dorian gathered his files, including the forged document and Tessa's evidence. Time to start the official process of exposing their misconduct. Time to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of people they were dealing with. As he walked to the HR department, his phone buzzed one final time. Eleanor, using her office number. Don't do this. Think about your father's legacy. He typed back, I am. That's why I'm making sure the truth comes out. All of it. Then he blocked that number 2 and stepped into the HR office, ready to begin the next phase of his plan for justice. They had tried to manipulate him, to force him into accepting their lies. Now they would learn that every action has consequences, and theirs were just beginning. The HR meeting lasted 2 hours. By the time Dorian emerged, Kenny James had been suspended pending investigation, and Marisol's department head had been notified of her impending termination. The evidence was too clear, too damning for any other outcome back in his office. He found 3 missed calls from Kenny and a string of increasingly angry text messages. "You got me suspended? You bastard. Answer your phone. You think you can destroy my career and get away with it?" Dorian forwarded the messages to his lawyer, adding them to the growing file of evidence. He was about to call David when his office door burst open. Kenny James stormed in, face flushed with rage. "You smug son of a bitch," Kenny snarled, slamming the door behind him. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" Dorian remained seated, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Kenny's fury. "Security is on their way up. I called them the moment I saw you enter the building." "I don't care." Kenny planted his hands on Dorian's desk, leaning forward. "You got what you wanted. I'm suspended, probably fired. Tessa's filing for divorce. What more do you want?" "Justice." Dorian met his gaze steadily. "For every lie, every deception, every moment you and Marisol thought you could fool me. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Kenny's voice cracked slightly. "We never meant what? To get caught." Dorian stood slowly. "To have your comfortable little arrangement exposed? Tell me, what exactly did you mean to happen when you decided to pass your child off as mine?" "That wasn't my idea," Marisol said. "Of course it wasn't your idea. You were just going to let it happen. Stand back and watch while another man raised your child." Dorian's voice dripped with contempt. "What kind of man does that make you, Kenny?" Kenny's fist shot out, but Dorian was ready. He stepped aside, letting Kenny's momentum carry him forward. As Kenny stumbled, security finally arrived, bursting through the door. "Perfect timing," Dorian said calmly as they restrained Kenny. "I want to press charges for assault and threatening behavior. I have video evidence of everything that just happened." "You planned this," Kenny spat as they dragged him toward the door. "You wanted this to happen." "No, Kenny. You did this to yourself." Dorian straightened his tie. "Every choice, every action, every consequence, they're all on you." After security left with Kenny, Dorian's phone rang. "David Mitchell. I just got a call from Eleanor's lawyer," David said without preamble. "They're trying a new angle." "What now?" "They're claiming you verbally acknowledged paternity at the hospital. Say they have witness statements from nurses." Dorian laughed. "Let me guess, these witnesses suddenly remembered this fact after speaking with my mother." "Most likely. But that's not all. They've filed emergency papers claiming you're mentally unstable, seeking to have your recent actions declared invalid due to temporary psychological distress." "Mother's idea, I assume?" Dorian shook his head. "She never could handle losing control. They're requesting an emergency hearing. Want to force you into therapy. Claim you're having a breakdown." "Perfect." Dorian smiled coldly. "Let them try. I have recordings of every conversation, documentation of every threat and manipulation attempt. By the time we're done, they'll be the ones needing therapy." His computer chimed an email from Tessa James with more evidence. Hotel security footage showing Kenny and Marisol together, date-stamped photos, even recordings of phone conversations. She was proving to be a valuable ally in this war. "One more thing," David said. "Eleanor's trying to access your trust fund. Claims she has power of attorney. Another forgery? Looks like it. Same source, probably this Marcus Reeves character. Added to the criminal complaints." Dorian's voice hardened. "In fact, contact the FBI. Forging multiple legal documents across state lines? That's federal territory. Already done. They're very interested in Mr. Reeves's operation." After hanging up, Dorian found a new email from Eleanor, sent from yet another account. "You're making a terrible mistake. This vendetta will destroy everyone involved. Meet me at the house tonight. We can still fix this quietly." He typed back, "Nothing quiet about forgery and fraud, mother. Expect a visit from the FBI soon. Maybe you can explain to them why you thought forging legal documents was a good idea." His phone buzzed Marisol this time, using another friend's number. They're saying I have to clear out my office by tomorrow. Please, you can't do this to me. I'm not doing anything to you, he replied. Your choices, your consequences. How's Kenny handling his suspension? Still throwing punches? What? What happened with Kenny? Ask him yourself. If security's done processing his assault charges. There was a long pause before her next message. This isn't you, Dorian. You're not this cruel. You never knew me at all, Marisol. If you did, you'd have known better than to try to trap me with another man's child. He blocked the new number and turned back to his work. The pieces were falling into place now, each action generating exactly the reaction he'd anticipated. Let them scramble. Let them panic. Let them try to salvage what remained of their lives that a knock at his door announced Linda. Mr. Hayes? The FBI agents are here about the forgery case. Dorian gathered his files, including all evidence of Eleanor and Marisol's attempts to forge documents. Time to escalate this to the next level. Time to show them exactly what happened when they tried to manipulate the wrong person. As he walked to the conference room, his phone lit up with one final message from Eleanor. You'll regret this. Family should protect each other. He typed back, you stopped being family the moment you chose to protect Marisol's lies instead of telling me the truth. Enjoy your conversation with the FBI. Then he blocked that number 2 and stepped into the conference room, ready to provide federal agents with everything they needed to build a case. His mother, Marisol, Kenny, even this Marcus Reeves, they would all face justice for their roles in this betrayal. They had tried to force him into accepting their lies, tried to manipulate him with forged documents and false claims. Now they would learn that every action has consequences, and theirs were about to become very, very real. The morning of the arrest dawned cold and gray, matching Dorian's mood as he watched FBI agents approach his family home. He stood by his car across the street, David Mitchell beside him, as the agents knocked on the door. You sure about this? David asked quietly. Once they make the arrests, there's no going back. They made their choices, Dorian replied, his voice steady. Now they face the consequences. Eleanor answered the door in her designer robe, her usual perfect composure cracking as she recognized the federal agents. Even from across the street, Dorian could hear her indignant voice rising. This is preposterous. Do you have any idea who I am? Mrs. Hayes, the lead agent's voice carried clearly in the morning air. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and forgery of federal documents. This is ridiculous. I demand to speak to your supervisor. Mother, Dorian called out, crossing the street. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Eleanor's face contorted with rage when she saw him. You did this to your own mother. No. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. You did this to yourself when you chose to commit fraud. When you decided that protecting Marisol's lies was more important than telling your own son the truth. I was protecting our family name. By forging documents? By trying to force me to raise another man's child? Dorian's laugh was bitter. Some protection. The agents moved forward with handcuffs. Eleanor's eyes widened in genuine fear for the first time. Dorian, please, she begged, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. Don't let them do this. I'm your mother. You stopped being my mother the moment you chose Marisol's side over the truth. He watched as they secured the cuffs. Where is she, by the way? Upstairs, Eleanor said through clenched teeth. With the baby. Your brother, Dorian. Whether you accept it or not, that child is not my brother. He's Kenny James's son, and everyone's about to know it. More agents emerged from the house, leading a handcuffed Marisol down the stairs. She'd been crying, her face blotchy and tear-stained. How could you? She demanded, struggling against the agent's grip. After everything we've been through? Dorian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You mean your affair? Your lies? Your attempt to trap me into raising Kenny's child? It wasn't like that. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. You could have told the truth. He met her eyes coldly. Instead, you and my mother tried to forge documents, tried to force me into accepting your lies. How's that working out for you? A commotion from the driveway drew their attention. Kenny James had arrived, bursting out of his car with wild eyes. What the hell is going on? He demanded, striding toward them. Marisol called me, said the FBI, Mr. James. One of the agents intercepted him. Perfect timing. We have some questions about your role in the document forgery scheme. Kenny's face paled. I don't know anything about any documents. No. Dorian pulled out his phone, playing a recording. Kenny's voice filled the air. Just sign the papers, Marisol. Eleanor's guy can make it look perfect. Dorian will never know. That's inadmissible, Kenny sputtered. You can't. Can't what? Record people conspiring to commit fraud. Dorian smiled coldly. You'd be surprised what's admissible when you have a federal warrant. Kenny lunged forward, but the agents were ready. They caught him before he could reach Dorian, forcing him to the ground as he struggled and cursed. Add assault on a federal officer to his charges, the lead agent called out. Mr. James, you're not helping your situation. Neighbors had begun to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Eleanor's face crumpled as she saw her carefully maintained social standing crumbling before her eyes. Dorian, she tried one last time, think about what this will do to our reputation. Your reputation? He laughed. Your reputation was destroyed the moment you decided to help cover up an affair and forge federal documents. This? He gestured to the scene around them. This is just making it official. Social media was already lighting up with news of the arrests. Dorian could see people filming with their phones, capturing the moment Eleanor Hayes and her co-conspirators faced justice. The press will be here soon, David mentioned quietly. Good. Dorian straightened his tie. Let them come. Let everyone see exactly what happens when you try to manipulate the wrong person. You're enjoying this, Marisol accused as the agents led her toward a waiting car. Enjoying it? No. Dorian's voice was ice. I'm serving justice. There's a difference. This isn't justice. Kenny spat from where the agents held him. This is revenge. Call it what you want. Dorian watched as they loaded his former wife into the FBI vehicle. You all made your choices. Now you face the consequences. Eleanor's voice rose in one final protest as they placed her in another car. This will destroy everything. All my work, all my social connections. Your social connections? Dorian called back. Don't worry, Mother. I'm sure they'll all be very interested in visiting you in federal prison. I hear white-collar crime facilities have excellent networking opportunities. The cars pulled away, leaving Dorian standing in front of his former home. Neighbors whispered and pointed, phones still recording every moment. David touched his arm. The DA wants to meet this afternoon to discuss the case. Ready? Dorian nodded, heading back to his car. More than ready. It's time everyone knew exactly what kind of people they've been dealing with. As they drove away, his phone buzzed with messages from Eleanor's social circle, already distancing themselves from the scandal. The carefully constructed facade of respectability she'd spent decades building was crumbling, just as he'd promised it would. Justice, he thought, watching the FBI cars disappear around a corner. Not revenge, no matter what Kenny claimed. Just pure, clean justice, served one betrayer at a time. The district attorney's office buzzed with activity as Dorian followed David through the corridors. News of the arrests had spread quickly, and every eye followed their progress. Inside the conference room, DA Rachel Martinez waited with a stack of files. Mr. Hayes, she greeted him, gesturing to a chair. We have quite a case building here. The evidence you've provided is comprehensive. I believe in being thorough, Dorian replied, settling into the chair. Clearly, she opened the top file. Multiple counts of fraud, forgery of federal documents, conspiracy, and now Mr. James has added assault on federal officers to the list. Your mother and Mrs. Hayes are looking at serious time. Good. Dorian's voice was firm. They deserve every minute of it. There's something else. Rachel pulled out a document. We've uncovered evidence that this Marcus Reeves has been forging documents for your mother for years. Tax forms, property deeds. She's been running quite an operation. Why am I not surprised? Dorian's laugh was cold. Mother always believed rules were for other people. His phone buzzed, Tessa James calling. He excused himself to take it. You should see the news, she said without preamble. Kenny's trying to spin this, claiming you set him up. Of course he is. Dorian moved to the window. How's that working out for him? Not well. I released the recordings of him planning the forgery with Marisol. His lawyer quit an hour ago. Perfect timing. The DA's building the case now. There's more, Tessa continued. I found evidence that Kenny and Marisol were planning this for months. They thought they could pressure you into accepting the baby, then use your acknowledgement to secure child support. Dorian's grip tightened on the phone. They planned this? Every detail. I found their emails discussing it. Eleanor was in on it from the start. She thought she could control you, force you to do the right thing, as she called it. Send everything to David, he instructed. Every email, every recording. It's time to bury them completely. Back in the conference room, Rachel was laying out the prosecution's strategy. Mrs. Hayes' social standing actually works against her here. The judge will want to make an example. A commotion in the hallway interrupted her. Kenny's voice carried through the door. I need to talk to him. Dorian, you can't do this to us. Security intercepted him before he could reach the conference room. But Dorian was already moving toward the door. David grabbed his arm. Don't engage with him. Let security handle it. But Dorian shook him off, stepping into the hallway where Kenny struggled against two officers. Can't do what to you? Dorian's voice cut through Kenny's shouts. Hold you accountable for your actions? Make you face consequences for once in your life? You don't understand, Kenny pleaded, still struggling. We can work something out. I'll sign away my rights to the baby, give you full custody. Full custody? Dorian's laugh echoed through the hallway. You still don't get it, do you? I don't want custody of your child. I don't want anything from you except justice. This isn't justice. Kenny's face was red with exertion. You're destroying everyone's lives. No, you did that. Dorian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You and Marisol destroyed everything the moment you decided to try to pass your bastard off as my child. Every life ruined, every career destroyed. That's on you. My son is your problem now. Dorian straightened his tie. I'm sure the family courts will be very interested in your custody arrangements. From prison, as security dragged Kenny away, Rachel appeared at Dorian's side. That was unwise. His lawyer could use that confrontation. His lawyer quit, Dorian informed her. And I just received more evidence of their conspiracy. Would you like to see the emails where they planned to extort me for child support? Rachel's eyes widened slightly. They documented their conspiracy? People like them always do. Dorian headed back to the conference room. They're so convinced of their own cleverness, they never expect to get caught. His phone buzzed again, a news alert this time. The story had broken nationally. Prominent socialite arrested in federal fraud scheme. Eleanor's carefully composed society photo stared back from the screen, alongside Marisol's corporate headshot and Kenny's mugshot. Your mother's asking to make a deal, Rachel mentioned, watching him read the article. Says she has information about other crimes, other conspiracies. Of course she does. Dorian set the phone down. Mother always kept dirt on everyone. Insurance, she called it. Should we consider no deals? His voice was firm. No plea bargains, no reduced sentences. They all face everything they've done, every charge, every consequence. That's unusually harsh, Rachel observed. Even for federal fraud cases, they try to trap me into raising another man's child. Dorian cut her off. Use forged documents to attempt to force me into accepting their lies. There's nothing typical about this case. His phone lit up with another message. Tessa again. Kenny's wife just filed for divorce, citing the affair, the fraud charges, and irreparable damage to our family's reputation. Want to guess who's representing her? Who? Eleanor's former divorce attorney. The one who helped her hide assets during her split from your father. Karma's got a sense of humor. Dorian smiled coldly. Send me the filing documents. I want to see Kenny lose everything, piece by piece. A knock at the conference room door announced David's return. You need to see this. Marisol's trying to make a statement to the press. They found her being led from her holding cell, makeup streaked with tears, still trying to maintain her dignity as reporters shouted questions. Mrs. Hayes, did you really try to pass off your lover's child as your husband's? Was Eleanor Hayes involved from the beginning? How long was the affair with Kenneth James? Marisol's face crumpled as she faced the cameras. This is all a misunderstanding. Dorian is acting out of anger, but we can work through this. A misunderstanding? Dorian's voice carried over the crowd as he approached. The reporters swung their cameras toward him. Was it a misunderstanding when you forged documents? When you and Kenny planned to extort me for child support? When you and my mother conspired to force me into accepting your lies? Dorian, please, Marisol begged, mascara running down her cheeks. Not like this. Not in public. Why not? You didn't mind deceiving me in public. Didn't mind letting everyone believe I was the father of your lover's child. He turned to the cameras. Want to know the truth? I have evidence of their entire conspiracy. Every email, every recording, every forged document. Would you like to see them? The reporters pressed closer, cameras flashing, microphones extended. Marisol sagged in the officer's grip as her last attempt at damage control crumbled. Take her back to her cell, Dorian instructed the officers. To the reporters, he added, my lawyer will be providing copies of all evidence to every major news outlet. Let everyone see exactly what kind of people they're dealing with. As they led Marisol away, she called out one last time, I loved you. Everything I did was because I loved you. No, Dorian replied, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Everything you did was for yourself, and now you'll face the consequences. Alone. 6 months later, Dorian stood in the courtroom as the judge prepared to deliver the sentences. The trial had dominated local headlines for weeks, exposing every detail of the conspiracy. Eleanor sat rigid in her designer suit, her perfectly maintained appearance a stark contrast to her circumstances. Beside her, Marisol had abandoned all pretense of composure, clutching a tissue as she awaited her fate. Kenny James, separated from them by his lawyer, stared straight ahead, his former confidence shattered. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, silencing the packed courtroom. Before I deliver the sentences, would any of the defendants like to make a final statement? Eleanor rose first, her voice wavering slightly. Your Honor, I realize now that my actions were misguided. I only wanted to protect my family's reputation. By committing fraud? The judge interrupted. By forging federal documents? By conspiring to force your son into accepting paternity of another man's child. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone, Eleanor insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Best for everyone. Dorian stood, unable to remain silent. Or best for your social standing? Mr. Hayes, the judge warned, please let the defendant speak. Marisol rose next, tears already flowing. Your Honor, I made terrible mistakes. The affair with Kenny, the lies, the forged documents, I know now how wrong it all was. If I could take it back, you're only sorry you got caught, Dorian interjected. Earning another warning look from the judge, Kenny was the last to stand. Your Honor, I accept responsibility for my actions. The affair was wrong, but the rest of this, the forgery, the conspiracy, that wasn't my idea. I was manipulated by... Objection. The prosecutor shot to her feet. Mr. James's emails clearly show his active participation in planning the fraud. Sustained. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked against the bench. Mr. James, attempting to shift blame at this point only damages your credibility further. The judge shuffled his papers, his expression grave. I've reviewed all evidence in this case, including the recently discovered emails showing the premeditated nature of this conspiracy. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, please rise. Eleanor stood, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her skirt. Your systematic abuse of your social position to facilitate fraud, your role in forging federal documents, and your attempts to coerce your own son into accepting paternity of another man's child show a disturbing pattern of manipulation and disregard for the law. I sentence you to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $500,000. Eleanor swayed, her carefully maintained facade finally cracking. But my charity work, my social obligations, we'll have to find someone else to handle them. The judge finished firmly. Mrs. Marisol Hayes? Marisol stood on shaking legs as the judge continued. Your participation in this fraud, your willing deception of your husband, and your role in attempting to secure false paternity rights demonstrate a calculated attempt to profit from your infidelity. For years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will also pay restitution of $250,000. My baby, Marisol sobbed. What about my baby? The child's custody will be determined in family court, the judge replied coldly. Mr. Kenneth James? Kenny rose, his jaw clenched. Your role in this conspiracy, combined with your subsequent assault on federal officers and attempts to intimidate witnesses, leaves me no choice. 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will pay restitution of $350,000. The gavel fell with finality. Court is adjourned. As officers moved to take the defendants into custody, Eleanor made one last attempt to reach Dorian. Son, please, don't let them do this to your mother. You stopped being my mother the moment you chose to protect their lies instead of telling me the truth. Dorian watched as they led her away. Enjoy federal prison, mother. I hear the social scene is quite restrictive. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. David guided Dorian through the crowd as questions flew. Mr. Hayes, how do you feel about the sentences? Will you seek custody of the child? Any comment on your mother's conviction? Dorian paused at the top of the courthouse steps, turning to face the media. Justice has been served. Every person involved in this conspiracy faced the consequences of their actions. That's all I have to say. Later that evening, in his new apartment across town, Dorian sat with Tessa James, reviewing the day's events. Kenny's lawyer called. She mentioned, sipping her wine. They're offering a deal in the divorce. He'll sign away all assets if I drop the civil suit. Are you going to take it? She smiled coldly. And let him off that easily? Not a chance. I want him to lose everything, piece by piece, just like you said. Speaking of losing everything, Dorian checked his phone. Mother's Social Club just voted to remove her name from the founder's wall. Apparently, federal fraud convictions violate their moral turpitude clause. How devastating for her. Tessa's laugh held no sympathy. And Marisol? Her parents took the baby back to Spain, said they couldn't bear the shame of what she'd done. He set his phone down. Kenny's DNA test came back officially today. He's definitely the father. Not that there was any doubt. You know, Tessa said thoughtfully, most men would have broken under this. The betrayal, the lies, the conspiracy, but you turned it around. Made them face everything they'd done. That's the difference between them and me. Dorian stood, moving to the window overlooking the city. They thought they could manipulate the truth, bend reality to suit their needs. But the truth always comes out, always demands its price. His phone buzzed with a final message, Eleanor, using her one phone call from prison. I hope you're satisfied with what you've done to this family. He typed back, completely satisfied. You all made your choices. Now you're facing the consequences. One by one, justice is served. Then he blocked the prison's number and turned back to his new life, free from their lies, their manipulation, their betrayal. They had tried to force him into accepting their deception, tried to make him complicit in their fraud. Instead, he had exposed every lie, every scheme, every betrayal. Let them sit in their prison cells, thinking about the choices that led them there. Let them remember that every action has consequences, every betrayal its price. He had served them their karma, one by one, until justice was complete.